Welcome back to a special edition of the France 24 debate on an unseasonably chilly Monday in Istanbul by the banks of the Bosphorus. I'm François Picard. With us in the special edition in partnership with Hürriyet Daily News, it's Editor-in-Chief Murat YETKIN. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Nagehan ALÇI, columnist for Milliyet newspaper. Also with us is Ihsan YILMAZ of the Columnist-linked movement of the university, Fatih University. And also with us is joining us, she is just graduated, Aysegul BAYAR. Aysegul, we've been talking in part one of our discussion about the current political crisis that's engulfed Turkey. A lot of people staying under the radar, fearful to talk in some cases waiting to see how the chips fall. Let me ask you, when the Gezi Park protests happened, a lot of people came to politics for the first time. You were telling me before we started the show that that's when you kind of sensed a generation gap between your generation and that of your parents looking at all the turmoil.
Well, our generation, that is defined as the Y generation, Gezi was like a laboratory for people from different social categories to get together and to, because before it was during the generation of my parents, for example, especially the Kurdish issue, etc.
I was going to say, Prime Minister Erdogan has been in power the whole time that you've been interested in politics.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, we haven't seen any alternative other than Erdogan. We have only read in books and discussed with our parents. And what was the question?
It was just about why we're not hearing very much of the traditional opposition, are we? And there's a bit of a generation gap on that score.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this new generation, I think, including me, we don't really tend to use the conventional way of making politics. As, for example, Erdogan deduces politics to vote box. I mean, you vote, and that's the result, and then you just don't have much right to oppose because you elected me in this democratic system. However, the young generation doesn't come to understand that really well, and we elected a parliament. However, like in the parliament, 50% of the people didn't vote for AKP. He always tries to ignore this, and so the voters for Erdogan just becomes passive after he is elected for the following years of his rule. And if they are opposed, they have to get passivated directly by police force, extreme usage of police force, by custody, and they tend to create a country of fear. And that's why, again, we have a history of torture, death penalties in the 80s and 70s. And that's why I think this generation is seen so much apolitical, because even though my parents are really interested in politics and they're leftist and they're opposing, they just always want to keep me protected. As many friends of mine who were in the streets in Gezi, they just didn't tell their parents that they were there because it's just like everybody's feared.
They didn't want them to worry.
Nobody trusts to the government. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, it's really sad.
Murat YETKIN, did you sense that?
I did. I did actually, because I'm the parent generation. So my daughter is 20 years old, so I experienced similar things. One of your street interviews, another lady said that we don't want to go towards east anymore. We want to go west. So that's why to keep up with the European Union project is very important for Turkey. Now Holland is in Turkey, and France is one of the countries that Turkish people perceives as Europe itself. So it is very important for France, for Holland now to claim back for this dynamo role in bringing Turkey and Europe closer to each other. Because as Turkey is linked, is anchored to Europe more, the standard, both economic and political And of course, social standards of Turkey will come closer to the European standards, which I believe will work better for both Europe and Turkey.
All right, I want to pick up on that point in a moment. First, though, to tell you that we were talking a minute ago about the ballot box being one component of the debate in this country. The ballot box is something very real right now because we're coming up to municipal elections here in Turkey. Top of people's concerns is inflation. The local currency has dropped nearly 30% since the Gezi Park protests, in part due to domestic reasons, in part international. The other issue we've been talking about is corruption. Let's take a look at this France 24 report on how the Erdogan years have been to ordinary folks.
Istanbul, a city on the move. With a population of 14 million, the economic capital of Turkey is often described as a mini China at the gates of Europe. At his office in the city centre, Halis Durak takes a final look at his latest collection for a French brand. His company manufactures clothing intended for sale in Europe. The past few years have been a boom time for the Made in Turkey label. Durak believes that this is a direct result of the government's steps to strengthen the economy.
We were a bit worried when they first came to power, thinking, oh no, they're Islamists. But I haven't personally seen any evidence of it. They've done a good job and achieved the impossible in Turkey. For example, 12 years ago, the army would always step in when something happened in Turkey. Those days are over.
This morning, he is visiting one of his subcontractors. Both men hope that the political crisis provoked by a recent corruption scandal will not disrupt the country's economic stability.
As long as there are no major upheavals in the foreign exchange rates, I believe that the economic crisis in the EU will begin to lift in the coming years. We are confident that this will improve the added value of the textile sector and that it will grow.
This confidence gave way to bitter disappointment for the inhabitants of Sulukule. In 2006, the government decided to completely redevelop this popular district of Istanbul. Its residents, the majority of whom voted for Erdogan, were promised new housing at a low price in exchange for the sale of their property. But the cost has proved steeper than planned, and many of them are now in serious debt.
I was born here. They tell me that this was done for my benefit, but I can't live here, let alone afford it. Only the devil himself could have come up with this payment plan.
I voted for the AKP 3 times. They're my hands for placing those votes.
Often set as an example to other countries, the Turkish model seems to be running out of steam. The current crisis may well have an effect on the coming municipal elections at the end of March.
Is the Turkish model running out of steam?
If we talk about economy, I would say that maybe what the AK Party did as the best was the economy. Because let's look back, the global crisis on almost all parts of the world, Turkey was almost not affected. The other economic fluctuations in our neighbor countries, look at Turkey, Turkey was almost not affected. So I would say that if we summarize AK Party years since 2002, so almost 12 years, we would say it's an economic success concerning Turkey's way she came since 2002.
And looking forward?
Looking forward now, since especially this last graft probe, economy is under threat. I would say that the dollar is rising without stop, and the euro also, and there is now Turkey is facing some economic problems. We will look to the future, but I would say that Turkish economy has been rooted quite successful in the last years. But I would also add that if we're now talking about Erdogan and his party, I would say Erdogan is party because he's a really strong leader and his party is just rooted around him. I would remind that he's still a very popular leader. The polls still shows his support around 50%. Probably in the coming municipality elections, they would get around 40 up to 43%. That's the calculation. So we're talking about a popular leader. loved, adored by their supporters, was also hated by their opponents. So we would say that Turkey is actually, the voters are black and white. And because the opposition is not strong enough to challenge Erdogan, the opponents have become quite insertive in expressing their hatred toward Erdogan. So that's why in Turkey, for example, we should also see that the opposition should be stronger in order to let people, the opponents, the not AKP voters, express themselves better in a political manner. That's maybe one of the problems, was why the Gezi movement was not handled successfully by the government, but also misused by some other groups opposing the government.
Aysegul?
Yeah, I will have another perspective. When we speak about economy, I think one of the most important things is to speak about the effects of economic development to the lives, socio-economic status of the people. For example, if we take one of the latest regulations on health, today, for example, now, university hospitals are considered as private hospitals. So while Erdogan is making a speech saying my citizens will go to whatever university, whatever hospital without paying, he's just making a law change, and people don't question enough to reveal the real fact, and they just continue their vote. As Ms. ALÇI says, it will come 43%. I don't think that at all that AKP government deserves a 43% support. There are really some laws that are contrary
But what she's saying is that because of a weak opposition, he'll continue to get that support.
Yeah, that's
but also because people are happy with the health, politics, and with the economy.
Well, I think they just don't dig enough to see, the weakness of the opposition party. I'm okay with, I'm really sure, and this also brings Erdogan really more votes. Also, we see a very miserable alienation between the state and the citizens. To give a really short example, for example, in Gezi protestations, the father of a little boy, 16-year-old, who got blessed in the manifestations, had a reportage with some journal, and he was saying, the first thing I thought was that I was a murderer, because this police who is paid by whose salary is paid by my taxes just targets my son just because he's opposing, he's just using his right to manifest in the streets. This is a very miserable alienation, and yeah.
Is the Turkish model running out of steam then?
I think so. When the Islamist government collapsed because of the army's interference in 1998, the Erdogan and his friends said that they would no longer oppose the European Union, and they would no longer call the European Union as a Christian club, but they would try to join the EU. And Fethullah Gülen, as an Islamic scholar, for the first time in Turkish Muslim history, said in 1994 that democracy is the best regime available and there is no return back from democracy. And his movement has been supporting the European Union for the last 40 years. And on the basis of principles, this European Union project and all other things, supremacy of law, separation of powers, human rights, and so on, the movement has supported the AKP. But since 2010, Erdogan keeps complaining about the European Union. When he visited Moscow last month, he said to Putin that, why don't you save us from the European Union by accepting us to the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement? So there are all sorts of signs that he is fed up with the European Union progress report. And Burhan Kuzu, on a live TV interview, threw the European Union progress report to the dustbin to show his disrespect for the annual report. So we get also signs that Erdogan now feeling that he has captured the state by democratic means. He no longer needs to pay a lip service to the European Union, democratic ideals and so on. So he is looking towards the east, unfortunately. But this is terrible for the Turkish economy because Turkish economy doesn't have oil. Turkey doesn't have high-tech industry. So we need foreign direct investment. We need Western investment. And even Arabs and all other Muslim countries have been investing in Turkey for the last decade because Turkey is approaching the European standards, not because they love Turks as their Muslim brothers. So, but now it seems that we are losing this supremacy in Turkey, so the economy and markets have been trembling and shaking.
Nagehan.
I don't agree, because I was, for example, one of the journalists accompanying Mr. Erdogan in his Brussels visit last week, and I would say that it's true that there has been a stagnation concerning the relations between EU and Turkey, but the
and
Prime
a few
Minister...
tense words at the press conference.
Yes, but it was both-sided. It was actually stagnation stemming from Turkey as well as from the EU, especially if you look at the governments in France and Germany and the hesitations towards EU, Turkey's membership. But now I have seen a will in Prime Minister to speed up the relations and the negotiation process with the European Union again. So I would say that it would be right to say that 2014 would hopefully be again a year for EU and Turkey relations to speed up.
Murat, YETKIN, do you see that happening?
It depends. It depends what kind of steps Erdogan is going to take inside. Because Turkish governments, not only this government, but past governments too, easily talk the talk, but when it comes to walk, the case is not there.
Did he, for instance, freeze the bill to reform the judiciary?
He had to because
of domestic pressure, or because of his trip last week to Brussels.
Crisis.
Because of many reasons. Because he got a very clear message after 3 letters in a week from European Union, from Stefan Füle, the enlargement commissioner, saying that they are not happy with this judicial bill, which would destroy the judicial independence and independence of courts, which is a constitutional must. Then he has frozen the bill in the parliament, not out of his generosity, of course, because he would know that if this bill would pass, the economic relations with Europe will be destroyed, will be damaged, and the political links too. On the contrary, Erdogan doesn't want to link, doesn't want to cut the links with Europe. So this might be a year of revisioning the relations with Europe, but it all depends on the steps that Erdogan will take in Turkey, in domestic politics. If the steps will be towards transparency, judicial independence, and away from concentration of powers in one hand, yes, there might be positive steps in Turkish-European relations too.
Ihsan, let me ask you, because there's this Turkish organization called TESEF that does a survey in the Arab world of how Arabs perceive Turkey. We all remember the rock star welcome that Erdogan got when he went to Cairo a couple of years back. It's no longer the case. He's dropped down on the list. Turkey's dropped down on the list of countries they admire to 3rd. But the ones that are in front are the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And what that survey shows is that people in the Arab world, they would like law to be based on religion. And people in Turkey, obviously, that's not the case. At the end of the day, was it an overstretch, Turkey's embrace of the Arab Spring?
It was definitely an overstretch, and most Arabs did not look at Turkey as an inspiring model just because of its Islamic credentials, but because it was an example of fusing Islam and democracy. So in a predominantly Muslim nation, you can have democracy and Anglo-Saxon type of secularism, and most Muslims did not object to that. And one of the most influential movements in Turkey, Gülen movement, repeatedly declared that Anglo-Saxon type of secularism is not against Islam, so Muslims can easily and comfortably live in such environments. So this type of understanding of Anglo-Saxon secularism, combining Islam and democracy, were seen by Arabs as an inspiring model. But nowadays what we see is increasing authoritarianism, and Arabs have seen that a lot. So they are fed up with this, and they've seen rhetoric.
At the end of the day, would you say that how much do Turks have in common with Arabs?
Not much, historically speaking, especially after the establishment of Turkey, not much. And Turkey, even in the Ottoman times, Turkey always looked towards westward. And for the last 200 years, Turkey have been democratizing and liberalizing itself, and secular laws came to Turkey during the time of the caliphs, Ottoman caliphs. And by the end of the 19th century, with the exception of the civil code, all Ottoman laws were secular laws, especially transplanted from France.
Nagehan, ALÇI, in that light, would you say that Erdogan has bit off more than he can chew by supporting the Islamists who are fighting in Syria?
Syria policy is a big debate issue, but since the photos came out last week concerning the huge massacre done by the Assad regime, I think first of all we should start saying that there can't be a solution with Assad in the regime, staying at the regime. So in principle, Turkish position, I always say, was right, defending that Assad must go and Syria must be reigned by popular votes chosen leader and political system.
But Turks are feeling the effects along that 900-kilometer border that you share with Syria.
There is a real security problem right now, and I can say that Turkey was too much involved in this Syria problem. But if you ask this question, if Turkey would not be involved that much, would that mean the border would be like a border to Greece today? No, a war is going on at our border, and it's impossible to stop that. But there is a very dangerous saying these days, implying that Turkey might be incorporating with Al-Qaeda. That is a really scary argument, because Turkey has been helping a lot to the opposition in Syria. And the Assad regime is making something in the last days. They are, those who are, the Free Syria army is evacuated. And in these areas, Al-Qaeda forces go. And the Assad regime agrees to that. So there is actually, and it's shown that Turkey is helping the Al-Qaeda forces in Turkey, which is actually the opposite. Turkey has been trying to be a center for the opposition to raise their voice in Turkey, but it has never been an ally to any military Al-Qaeda affiliated group in Syria or wherever else.
Murat YETKIN, how much of a yardstick of Erdogan's foreign policy will his Syria position be in 2014?
Well, it's clear that things did not went as Erdogan has planned in Syria, neither in Egypt. So the developments in both Syria and Egypt was as a result of collapse of Muslim Brotherhood opposition in Syria and government in Egypt. That wasn't something that Erdogan has planned. The policy was sort of based on the success of Muslim Brotherhood. That's a moderate, relatively moderate political line in the Islamic world, a success of those, but it failed. When it failed, the vacuum was filled by Al-Qaeda and like movements. So Turkey is in process of revising that policy nowadays, in the last few months, we can say. And as far as we know from our information, that at the very moment or during this visit of Hollande in Ankara, Syria is one of top topics that they are discussing, and we expect some more cooperation in future as a result of a strategic cooperation agreement between two countries, which will involve cooperation, more cooperation on Syria, because up until now we have journalistic information that there is a cooperation between intelligence services, etc. But it seems both Europe and Turkey needs more cooperation on Syria to handle things more properly.
All right, so you're saying the current visit by the French president
is very important
to Turkey is very important, and that
not only because of Syria, but because of European Union relations and economic relations too. I think Hollande is expecting more economic agreements with Turkey, and we have already Japanese, Turkish, French cooperation in a nuclear plant.
And we'll see, of course. We'll see, of course, if it does, as you say, complete that move, that trend back towards Europe and the European Union.
That's what I hope, at least personally.
I want to thank you, Murat YETKIN. This show produced in cooperation with Hürriyet Daily News. I also want to thank Aysegul BAYAR for joining us as well. Ihsan, YILMAZ, and as well Nagehan, ALÇI for being with us. Thank you for joining us here in Istanbul for this special edition of the France 24 debate.
France 24, history in the making.